let's begin. In the heart of a bustling city, where power and wealth dictated the rhythm of life, stood a man who had mastered the art of dominance. His name was Alexander Hart, a figure both feared and revered in equal measure. To know Alexander was to understand that his world revolved around discipline, control, and an unyielding determination to protect what was his. For years, he had built his empire with precision, first as a formidable security consultant, then as the head of his own firm. He was not just successful, he was untouchable. The men who crossed him often found themselves regretting it, while those who worked under him did so with a mix of admiration and trepidation. Alexander wasn't merely respected, he was a force of nature. His personal life mirrored his professional one. At home, he was the architect of order, ensuring that every detail aligned with his vision of perfection. His wife, Isabella, was the crown jewel of his meticulously crafted existence. She was everything he believed a woman should be: beautiful, graceful, and utterly devoted. Her presence by his side was a testament to his success, a symbol of the life he had carved out through sheer willpower. Together, they were the epitome of a power couple, envied by many, understood by few. Their son, Ethan, was the next chapter in Alexander's legacy, a boy already showing glimpses of the strength and resolve his father instilled in him. For Alexander, life was a series of calculated moves, each decision reinforcing his dominion over his world. He thrived on the certainty that no one could take from him what he had earned. Or so he thought. Beneath the polished surface of their seemingly perfect marriage lay cracks that even Alexander's ironclad control couldn't foresee. Little did he know, the very foundation of his empire was about to be shaken by a betrayal so profound it would unravel everything he held dear. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Isabella, once the embodiment of devotion, started to shift. Her laughter, once melodic and genuine, now carried a faint edge of defiance. Her gaze, which used to linger on Alexander with adoration, now flickered away too quickly, as if she were hiding something. It wasn't just her demeanor. Her habits changed too. She began coming home later than usual, her phone perpetually glued to her hand, her fingers dancing across the screen with a secretive urgency. Alexander noticed the way her lips curved into a smirk when she thought he wasn't looking, a smirk that seemed to mock the life they had built together. At first, he dismissed it as stress or boredom, perhaps even the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. But the signs grew harder to ignore. Her wardrobe shifted, tighter dresses, higher heels, makeup applied with a boldness that bordered on rebellion. She started attending work events without him, brushing off his questions with vague excuses. "It's just networking," she'd say, but the glint in her eye told a different story. Then there was the way she spoke about her boss, a man named Victor Langston. His name slipped into conversations more frequently, always accompanied by subtle praise. "He's ambitious," she remarked one evening, her tone almost wistful. "He knows how to get things done." Alexander's jaw tightened at the sound of Victor's name, though he said nothing. He prided himself on control, on choosing his battles wisely. But inside, unease churned. He knew men like Victor, charismatic, entitled, and dangerously persuasive. They thrived on conquest, on taking what didn't belong to them. And Isabella, she wasn't immune to charm. Alexander tried to rationalize her behavior, telling himself she wouldn't dare cross the line. After all, she knew who he was, what he was capable of. She had seen the lengths he would go to protect what was his. Yet deep down, a seed of doubt took root. Something was wrong, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless to stop it. The turning point came on a cold, rain-soaked evening, the kind that seemed to mirror the storm brewing within Alexander. He had just returned from a late meeting, his mind still preoccupied with the day's negotiations, when he noticed the faint glow of Isabella's phone on the kitchen counter. She had left it behind, a rare oversight for someone who had become so guarded with her device. Curiosity gnawed at him, but it wasn't curiosity alone that drove him to pick it up. It was the weight of suspicion, the creeping dread that had been festering for weeks. He unlocked the screen with a password she had carelessly mentioned in passing months ago. What he found shattered the fragile illusion of their marriage. A string of messages, intimate and explicit, filled the screen. They were from Victor, each word dripping with arrogance and entitlement. "You deserve better than him," one read. "I can give you the life you've always wanted." Another message contained a photo. Isabella, dressed in lingerie, her expression a mix of seduction and defiance. Alexander's blood ran cold as he scrolled further, uncovering plans for a weekend getaway, coded references to nights spent together, and promises of a future far removed from the life they had shared. The betrayal was undeniable, but what struck him most was the deliberate cruelty of it. She hadn't just strayed. She had orchestrated this with meticulous care, leaving breadcrumbs for him to find. Alexander's hands trembled as he set the phone down, his mind racing. He replayed every moment of the past months, the late nights, the secretive smiles, the growing distance between them. It all made sense now, but clarity brought no relief. Instead, it ignited a firestorm of emotions: rage, humiliation, and a searing sense of violation. He had built his life on control, yet here he was, completely powerless against the betrayal unfolding before him. The woman he had cherished, the life he had protected with such ferocity, had been dismantled piece by piece. And worst of all, she had done it knowingly, deliberately, as if daring him to confront her. The discovery of Isabella's infidelity ignited a fury within Alexander that demanded action, but he refused to let emotion dictate his next move. Revenge, he knew, required precision, a methodical dismantling of her carefully constructed facade. That night, as she walked through the door, oblivious to what he had uncovered, Alexander greeted her with an icy calm that sent a shiver down her spine. "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, gesturing toward the kitchen table. The air was thick with tension as she hesitated, sensing the shift in his demeanor. Seated across from him, Isabella attempted to maintain her composure, but Alexander's piercing gaze left no room for evasion. "You've been careless," he began, sliding her phone across the table. Her eyes widened as she recognized the evidence of her betrayal laid bare before her. For a fleeting moment, panic flickered across her face, but she quickly masked it with defiance. "What is this supposed to prove?" she snapped, her voice laced with false bravado. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "It proves nothing I didn't already suspect. But now we're going to play this my way." Over the next hour, Alexander outlined his plan with chilling clarity. He informed her that their marriage was over, not just emotionally, but legally and financially. He had already consulted his lawyers, securing emergency custody of Ethan and freezing all joint accounts. Her access to their shared life would vanish overnight. "You wanted freedom?" he asked, his tone cutting like steel. "Consider this your chance to experience it." Isabella's bravado crumbled as the reality of her situation sank in. She pleaded, argued, and eventually resorted to tears, but Alexander remained unmoved. Every word she spoke only reinforced his resolve. By the time dawn broke, Isabella was gone, leaving behind a trail of shattered illusions. Alexander watched her leave, his heart a fortress of ice. The battle lines had been drawn, and he was determined to emerge victorious. This was no longer about love or loyalty. It was about power, and Alexander intended to wield it with unrelenting force. With Isabella out of the picture, Alexander turned his attention to the man who had dared to encroach upon his territory, Victor Langston. Victor was everything Alexander despised: arrogant, manipulative, and convinced that his wealth and status granted him immunity. But Victor had underestimated his opponent. Alexander wasn't just a man. He was a strategist, and he approached this phase of his revenge with surgical precision. The first step was gathering intelligence. Through discreet inquiries and connections within Victor's company, Alexander uncovered a web of unethical practices: embezzlement, falsified reports, and questionable dealings with offshore accounts. These weren't mere suspicions. They were actionable offenses, waiting to be exposed. With the evidence in hand, Alexander made a single call to a former associate who owed him a favor. Within days, whispers of an internal investigation began circulating through Victor's corporate empire. The man who had once strutted through boardrooms with an air of invincibility was suddenly scrambling to defend himself. But Alexander wasn't satisfied with merely tarnishing Victor's reputation. He wanted to dismantle him entirely. Using his network of contacts, he orchestrated a media leak that painted Victor as a predator, exploiting vulnerable employees for personal gain. The story spread like wildfire, igniting outrage and prompting a formal inquiry. Victor's career unraveled in spectacular fashion. He was fired, blacklisted, and publicly humiliated. When Isabella showed up at work the following Monday, she was met by security personnel escorting her out of the building. Her connection to Victor had sealed her fate, and just like that, she was unemployed, penniless, and utterly alone. Alexander watched from the shadows as the dominoes fell, each one a testament to his meticulous planning. He didn't gloat or revel in their downfall. Instead, he felt a cold satisfaction. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about restoration. By erasing Victor and Isabella from his world, he had reclaimed his power and ensured that neither of them would ever threaten his empire again. As the dust settled from the chaos he had unleashed, Alexander found himself standing at the precipice of a new beginning. The house, once a monument to his shared life with Isabella, now bore no trace of her presence. He had stripped it clean, every photograph, every memento, every reminder of her existence reduced to ash in the fire pit outside. The emptiness that remained was not one of loss, but of liberation. For the first time in years, Alexander felt unburdened, as though the weight of his past had finally lifted. He walked through the halls with a renewed sense of purpose, his footsteps echoing in the silence. This was his domain, and it belonged to him alone. Ethan, now 7, had grown into a spirited boy who idolized his father. Alexander poured himself into raising him, teaching him the values of resilience, discipline, and self-reliance. They spent weekends exploring the countryside, hiking trails that tested their endurance and strengthened their bond. In the evenings, they played chess, a game Alexander used to impart lessons about strategy and foresight. Every move matters, he would say, his voice steady and instructive. Think ahead, anticipate consequences, and never let anyone dictate your path. Ethan listened intently, his young eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond his years. Work became Alexander's sanctuary, a place where he could channel his energy into rebuilding and expanding his empire. He secured lucrative contracts, forged alliances with powerful figures, and expanded his firm's reach into untapped markets. Success followed him like a shadow, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it served as a testament to his resilience, proof that he could rise above betrayal and emerge stronger. Nights were spent in quiet reflection, a glass of whiskey in hand as he stared out at the city skyline. He thought of Isabella occasionally, not with anger but with detachment, as though she were a character in someone else's story. She had chosen her path, and he had chosen his. There was no room for regret. Alexander's transformation was not just external, but deeply internal. He had once equated control with dominance, believing that power was derived from fear and submission. But through the crucible of betrayal and revenge, he had come to understand that true strength lay in self-mastery. He no longer needed to micromanage every aspect of his life or obsess over perceived threats. Instead, he embraced adaptability, trusting in his ability to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. This newfound perspective brought a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that anchored him even in moments of uncertainty. Life moved forward, steady and deliberate. Alexander rebuilt not just his empire, but himself, emerging as a man who was no longer defined by the past but shaped by it. He had faced the abyss and stared it down, emerging on the other side with clarity and resolve. The world around him continued to spin, but Alexander stood firm, a master of his destiny and a guardian of his legacy. Years passed, and Alexander's life settled into a rhythm of stability and purpose. Ethan flourished under his father's guidance, growing into a confident teenager who bore little resemblance to the wide-eyed boy of his early years. The two shared a bond that transcended words, a mutual understanding forged through shared experiences and unspoken trust. Alexander had become not just a father, but a mentor, shaping Ethan into a young man who embodied the virtues of resilience and integrity. Yet, Despite the outward appearance of contentment, there were moments when Alexander's thoughts drifted to the woman who had once been the center of his world. Isabella, or rather, the ghost of her, still lingered in the recesses of his mind, a faint echo of a life he had left behind. One evening, as Alexander sat in his study reviewing documents for an upcoming project, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number, accompanied by a single image. The photo depicted a gaunt, hollow-eyed woman seated in the corner of a dimly lit shelter. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes tattered, and her once stunning features obscured by years of hardship. Though her appearance was unrecognizable, there was no mistaking the unmistakable sadness in her gaze. Beneath the image, a brief caption read, "She's been asking about you." Alexander stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the weight of the past pressed heavily upon him. Memories of Isabella, her laughter, her defiance, her betrayal, flooded his mind, stirring emotions he had long buried. But as quickly as they surfaced, they receded, replaced by the cold clarity that had guided him through the darkest chapters of his life. He exhaled slowly, his fingers hovering over the delete button. With a decisive tap, the message vanished, leaving no trace behind. Setting the phone aside, Alexander rose from his chair and walked to the window. The city stretched out before him, its lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. He thought of Isabella's current plight, the life she had chosen for herself, and the consequences of her actions. She had sought freedom, rebellion, and control, but in doing so, she had lost everything. Alexander felt no pity, only a detached acknowledgement of her fate. She had made her choices, and he had made his. The symmetry of it brought a strange sense of closure, as though the final chapter of their story had been written without either of them realizing it. Turning away from the window, Alexander returned to his desk and picked up a framed photograph of Ethan. The boy smiled brightly, his eyes alight with mischief and determination. Alexander allowed himself a rare smile, one that softened the hard edges of his face. Whatever scars the past had left, they no longer defined him. He had risen above betrayal, rebuilt his life, and created something enduring. As he placed the photo back on the desk, he felt a quiet certainty settle over him. Isabella was gone, not just from his life, but from his thoughts. She was a shadow, a memory, a lesson learned. And Alexander? He was free.